In the early days of the UFC, there were no weight classes, no time limits, and barely any rules. It was a wild, untamed battlefield where only the toughest survived. And in 1995, one of the biggest matches in MMA history took place. Royce Gracie versus Shamrock 2. A fight that was supposed to settle the score, but instead left fans frustrated and forced the UFC to change forever. To understand the controversy, we have to go back to UFC 1 in '93. Royce Gracie, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu master, shocked the world by defeating 3 opponents in one night, including Ken Shamrock in just 57 seconds. Shamrock, a powerful submission wrestling specialist, never got over the loss. He wanted revenge. Fast forward to UFC 5 in 1995. The rematch was set. Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock 2. This time, Shamrock was prepared. He had been training relentlessly, promising to dominate Gracie and prove that the first fight was a fluke. The world was watching. This was the first super fight in UFC history. But here's the issue. The UFC at the time had no judges. The only way to win, knockout or submission. When the fight started, it was clear Shamrock had learned his lesson. He wasn't going to rush in and get submitted again. Instead, he took a patient, cautious approach. He wrestled Gracie to the ground and controlled him, avoiding any submission attempts. For 30 minutes, they stayed locked in a grappling battle. The crowd started booing. People expected a war, but instead they got a slow, methodical chess match. Another interesting thing about this bout was that the UFC implemented a time limit, a very generous 30 minutes. Before this, bouts were either finished or the competitors were too fatigued to continue. But this time they had 2 competitors that took the training seriously and were ready to die in that cage. As a result, the bout went 30+ minutes, at which point John McCarthy was instructed to stop the bout and implement a 5-minute overtime, meaning this bout had to end soon. With only a few minutes left, Shamrock finally started landing punches. He finally drew blood, and for the first time, it actually looked like someone was winning this fight. But before he could finish the job, the fight was stopped. The 5-minute overtime expired, and because there were no judges, the fight was declared a draw. The crowd was furious. Shamrock believed he had done enough to win, but the rules left no room for a decision. This fight, instead of settling the rivalry, left even more questions. The fight was a disaster for the UFC, but also a turning point. After UFC 5, the organization introduced judges and stricter time limits, so that fights could no longer end in an unsatisfying draw. Ken Shamrock never got an official shot at Royce in the UFC, but the rivalry lived on for decades. In 2016, 21 years later, they fought one last time in Bellator, with Gracie winning by TKO. So what do you guys think? Do you prefer the old school rules of no time limit? How do you think it would play out in today's competitive landscape? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more legendary MMA stories. And I'll see you guys next time on Tony's MMA Corner.